While we're waiting, does anybody have a special reason why they're interested in this topic? Are you interested just in general in AI, or do you have some background in it or something, or any reason why you're especially interested in it, or was it seem like a scary topic and you wanted to hear more about it? Um, any thoughts?
Well, my interest comes from, listening to others talking about AI and how eventually it's going to displace the workforce. And I think there are lots of examples of when you put humans, and I'm sorry, this is sexist, but particularly men, out of meaningful work, that doesn't work out well for the community as a whole. Men have a tendency to not respond well to not having meaningful work. And so when this topic came up and I started exploring it, it's like, yeah, let's add some maternal, uh, feminine kinds of thoughts into the discussion. It fascinated me to take that angle with it.
Yeah, yeah. What you meant, I guess, is that men are if they're out of work, then they're going to be doing bad things. Is that what you're suggesting? If they aren't kept busy or something?
There's there's just too many examples of where that's happened,
Yeah,
particularly in our First Nations and Inuit communities, et cetera, et cetera. It hasn't worked out well generally.
yeah. Well, I actually agree with you. I think there's in fact, it doesn't even require being unemployed. There's over. I mean, I've actually made this a topic in the past, rather distant past now, about the difference between uh, how morality and male criminality stacks up against female uh, immorality and criminality. It's just overwhelmingly obvious to criminologists that like 95% of everybody who's incarcerated in the world everywhere in all times is always been males. They're they're risk congenitally risk takers. They push the boundaries of things. If there's rules or laws, they're the first ones to break them. There's evolutionarily there are reasons why that happens, but it's also obvious that if you don't keep guys busy, they're going to get into trouble. I mean, that's been confirmed by evolutionary biologists, by sociologists, by criminologists, by pretty much everywhere. And so, yeah, although, yeah, that isn't exactly the topic we're doing today, though. What I'm saying is, I mean, I sort of understand. Yeah, well, maybe I should. I'll go ahead and finish this thought. More people are coming. Um, Geoffrey Hinton, the guy who sparked this topic, is a Nobel laureate, cognitive scientist, psychologist who was very early on one of the pioneers of developing AI, and he's the one who, like I said, you can that sparked the topic. And he's not the only one, but he's certainly a very prominent figure who tried to raise the alarm that AI might destroy us unless we do something to, I guess, instill or program uh, maternal, or I think he meant more generally caring instincts into these machines, so that they don't abuse and use humanity. And what I'm going to do is largely suggest, or argue for it, and people don't have to agree with me, but I think I want to try to uh, offer reasons why. That's what we do in philosophy, is to try to make an argument and try to support it with some reasoning that is sound, uh, but it's never a settled issue. There can be counter arguments to this as well. But I want to suggest that Geoffrey Hinton's proposal is not going to work. Uh, Not in the literal, unless he means something different from what he says he means. And it could be that he does. Maybe what he's trying to say, if all he's trying to say is that we need to do something to to put boundaries on artificial intelligence and the power it has to alter society and our world in such a way that it doesn't uh, it doesn't abuse humanity, we need to put restrictions on it. That makes perfect sense. For the same reason, those of us old enough to remember the nuclear, post World War II and the old duck and cover days when we had to, we were growing up believing that the world could end in the next few minutes because of nuclear holocaust. That was a human-made anthropogenic way in which we could all become extinct through nuclear war. We've been living with that for more than a century now, more than at least a half a century or more. Um, and then, and since then, there have been several other threats, anthropogenic threats that could wipe out humanity that are have in which human activity is involved. Things like genetic engineering and more recently, well, climate change. Although there's a mixture there of natural and artificial causes, but uh, all these things. And if AI develops the way Geoffrey Hinton fears, it just adds another to the stack of things that could wipe us all out, as though we needed more things. But like that. Uh, but what I'm going to be saying is that and many people, I think there's some confusion there when he says instilling maternal instincts into machines. That he can't mean that literally because that's not possible. He must mean, oh, he's just using it as a metaphor. We just need to put safeguards on these things, and that's true with nuclear uh, development or with genetic engineering or any other technology we have. Yeah. But philosophically, I think if you listen to his own lecture, he seems to be suggesting something more than that. For instance, he says that machines, AI, will develop human emotions or consciousness, and that is highly controversial. Uh, whether machines will ever be able to have things like intelligence or consciousness in the same way, with those words meaning the same thing they mean to us. If all you're saying is that machines can manipulate tremendous amounts of data very rapidly, there's no problem. Calculators have been doing that with adding numbers for decades. Very specific task. But the worry here is AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which means intelligence that's not just good at one specific task, but potentially anything. Anything a human could do, but they could do it better. For example, there already are machines, AIs that can beat any human at chess. There used to be a time 20 years ago when that was borderline. Now there's no contest. There are chess playing machines that could beat the best human chess players in the world. And we have no chance against them because they've gotten that good. But they're very specific to one task. The fear here is that if they could beat us at everything, even understanding our own motivations, could they better understand us than we understand ourselves? That's what we mean by general intelligence. That's what is, I think, scary to many people. It's beyond just being very good at one specific task, but about all the things that humans are more or less good at, they could be extremely good at. And that ever happened, then you have to ask the question: why would they want to keep us around? What's the point? What do we serve any purpose? Perhaps they would keep us around the way we keep endangered species around and put them in zoos or for decoration, but they don't serve any purpose. We don't. We excel. They would excel at over us at everything. If that's the fear. And is there anything stopping that from happening? And that's part of the controversy that part of it of the controversy here. And Mike just not coming today. Uh, Mike had last 2 weeks ago he had a session where he invited. He's more of a technical guy, and he's not here today. Usually I thought he would be here. He and his friends are actually people who work with computers and artificial intelligence, and they were discussing the technical side of this. How feasible, how close are they to this sort of thing? I'm not a computer scientist. I'm more more of a humanist and connected with. I don't know a lot about philosophy and about analyzing concepts, and that's the perspective that where I'm coming from this today. So I'm going to go ahead and officially get started because we have a good number of people here, and that's good enough. Again, I want to welcome everybody who's here, and and there's a long write-up that I did, which the one that's posted on Meetup, but that's actually a fraction of the longer one, which goes in much greater detail into the stuff. And there's a lot of links there in case people want to uh, pursue some of the things I say or get more explanation there. And also, the way this is going to work for those new people here is I want to try to break up the subject and talk about a little bit, and then pause and we have some people can ask questions or uh, you know uh, disagree or whatever. We'll have several discussion opportunities along the way because I don't really like to lecture for long periods, but uh, and then toward the end we'll open it up to whatever people's thoughts are about this matter at all, whether you agree or not. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to start by talking about the concepts involved, specifically what it means to be artificial, which necessarily means you have to talk about the opposite. Well, it's supposed to be the opposite of being natural. What does it mean to be natural? These are all concepts that philosophers have been struggling with for a long time, and some scientists as well. And then the big question is, even after we get past that problem, what is intelligence? What counts as intelligence? Who decides what is intelligence? We have our everyday understanding of how we use the word, but here we have to get more specific because uh, it's people, neuroscientists, psychologists, philosophers of mind, scientists of every stripe, biologists even, don't agree about what intelligence is. There's a paper I have a link to in the extended write-up. Uh, this is now at least 10 years old, in which these computer scientists were trying to, because that was the early days of AI, and they were trying to define what they mean when they talk about AI. So they looked up well, is there a real definition that every expert agrees upon for the concept of intelligence? They came up with 70 distinct definitions. And some of them shared a lot, but there isn't. You ask a psychologist, he'll say one thing, a neuroscientist, a biologist, a person on the street, and of course a philosopher, and you're going to get different answers. And and then it gets even worse when you talk about consciousness, because that is such a vague concept. No one seems to have a clear understanding about what it means to be conscious. In general, we know the everyday understandings of that, but when we talk about animals and non-human things that we say are conscious or intelligence, things are very much muddy, very muddy. So anyway, I'm going to start again to talk about the contrast between artificial and natural. So the reason this is important is because Geoffrey Hinton said that we need to instill maternal instincts into artificial intelligence, or else, he seemed to imply. Um, well, if anything is natural, maternal instincts are natural. Perhaps it's the paradigm case of anything that we want to say is natural, because mothers have been around for millions of years, and species, and there we literally would not be here if there wasn't some maternal instinct to care for young, whether it's us or all other living forms. So that really is the paradigm example of something that is natural. And he's trying to suggest that something like that, something that's natural as maternal instinct, should be put into a computer or artificial intelligence. What would that look like? Um, Machines, artificially intelligent things, are programmed. They're given instructions and they follow those instructions. And what's characteristic of them is that they follow those instructions to a greater degree, at great speed, and assuming there's nothing wrong with the person programming or the hardware, they do it much better, much faster than anything humans can do. Um, so they follow instructions, and they follow instructions very well, much better than any human or any animal can do. So well that, especially if they're super capable. But how do you get an instinct is like is a feeling. We all know what feelings are. Do machines have anything like that? And the answer to that is unless you start imagining or projecting onto the machine feelings, we have no proof or even suggestion that they actually have feelings. Although I'm going to talk about this in a moment, it could be that, see, whether or not something has feelings is, we don't even know for sure whether other people have feelings. We can look at them, we observe their behavior, we to the extent we can understand or explain that behavior because they act like they have feelings, like we would act under if we were feeling sad or happy or whatever. And so we project that onto them, but we have only their behavior to go by as evidence for what's going on inside them. And we can be deceived by that. Um, and it's part of our human nature that we do that. We do project our internal experiences on to other people and other animals and other things that act as though they were sort of like us internally to a degree. Uh, Many people believe that animals have feelings that like us, and most people can't unless there's something unusual about you, that you're a psychopath or can't don't have any sense of empathy, are something I call empathetic imagination, which is the ability to project upon other things something of what you're feeling based upon how they behave. But that's all we have. We don't have the internal experience of being another being, whether it's an animal, human, and of course not a machine. We can only go by what we observe and what we know about our own experience. Um, I think it can be this empathetic imagination comes in degrees. Some people have a lot of it. Some people have none of it. Those would be extreme examples of psychopaths who are unable to care about anyone but themselves. Although the most dangerous ones can act like they do, and that's what makes them dangerous because they can mimic perfectly normal people but not really feel anything. Those people tend to be few, but they do exist. And then you at the other extreme, you have people that are so empathetic that they're actually it's a danger to their health. They become objects of abuse by other people. They get taken advantage of. Most people fall somewhere in the middle. We're able to be empathetic to a point, to project to a point, but also be able to step back and ask, well, does this make sense? And so not be completely at the mercy of others who of your feelings or how others might exploit your feelings. Um, but I've actually talked about this in the past. I'll mention it here, but there are some people that are so empathetic that they're able to project feelings on not just animals, not just people, not just animals, but plants and even ecosystems and even machines. Uh, they actually, and to some extent, it helps too if the machine has certain features about it. Like, for example, there are robots the Japanese have built to take care of robots, or take care of people who have a cute face. If it has a face, that helps to get you to believe that there's something there that you can relate to on a human level. It doesn't have to look like a person where you couldn't tell the difference. You can tell it's a machine, but it has a friendly aspect to it. And that has an effect on us. We start, whether we like it or not, to treat it as though it was a living thing, as though it really could uh, could experience some of what we feel. And um, and some people are able to stretch that empathetic imagination beyond just things that look even vaguely human or animal-like, but to inanimate objects. People have been known to fall in love with their cars. Um, there's a documentary you can find, I think it's still on YouTube, from years back, about something called objective sexuality. It's about people who fall in love, romantically in love, with objects like the Eiffel Tower or the Golden Gate Bridge or the Berlin Wall. There's a woman famously who married the Eiffel Tower. And there's a these are attempt, and she talks about why she did this. She has feelings for this inanimate object, which she feels in some way that inanimate object can return those feelings. It's easy to dismiss this as, there's something wrong with this person, but it is documented rare for people at least to talk about having such strong feelings for inanimate objects, but it's been known to happen. Um, but of course, those are extreme cases. Just getting back to the more pertinent topic here, getting back to what it means to be natural, for example, because I think we need to understand that before we can understand what's artificial. And there's multiple senses of what it means to be natural. There's one sense in which the opposite of natural means supernatural, as in spirits or God or something. If you take that definition, then everything in the physical universe, everything on the planet and in anywhere that we can see, every animal, every plant, every rock, every stone is perfectly natural, including the things we create. Our computers are natural. Our, the water bottles are natural. Everything is natural because it's not, if it's not supernatural, it's natural. It's composed of elements of the natural world. There aren't elements on the periodic table that nothing that you physically interact with has things in it that are not composed of elements in the periodic table, and they're perfectly natural. So nothing is artificial. Beavers' dams are perfectly natural, even though the beavers create them. Computers are perfectly natural because we create them. They're things we do. So that sense of natural is probably not the one we're talking about, but I just want to point it out because there's a sense in which nothing is artificial. Everything is part of the natural world. The other sense, I think, is in which when we use the word natural, is we mean the opposite of a thing, something we create with our hands. Something that was human made, like a computer, for example, or a water bottle, or the clothes we're wearing. They're artifacts. They're creations of human beings, and so they don't grow on trees. They don't sprout from the ground. If that's what you mean by artificial or non-natural, then yes, computers are not natural any more than water bottles are, for that matter. Um, but okay, so it's important to just be clear that and there's a sense in which everything in the universe is natural, and there's a sense in which only those things which are made by humans in a way we can perceive are non-natural or artificial. Um, so I don't. So maybe I want to pause here in case somebody wants to say something, because uh, I said earlier that Geoffrey Hinton said we should program um, maternal instincts into computers. I think he's confused. I don't think he really either he's confused or he's not using the right. He really he's exaggerating. He's saying what we should be doing is taking care about how we deploy these machines so that they don't abuse us. That's what he's trying to say, I think. Except that in his talk, he goes beyond that. He talks about computers having consciousness and a lot of the mental characteristics of human beings, and that's where things get really difficult because we don't have any understanding of what it would be like to be a machine and to have feelings or uh, and I'm going to get to intelligence in a moment because that's the big thing controversy here, not so much artificial or natural. But um, does anyone have any questions about anything I've said so far, or disagreements? Or go ahead, Jack. Are you there?
So, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah. So I watched the CNN interview. I didn't know that he did a longer talk on this topic. I would imagine he did, and
Yeah, there's a link to it right at the beginning of the description. He gave an hour-long talk
yeah,
explaining the
so
background of his thought. Yeah.
I saw the two videos. I saw the CNN video, and then you posted a video of a comedian talking to ChatGPT. Those are the only two that I saw. Um, but yeah, and it just kind of like what I got from the CNN interview. He no, I think he's talking about a different approach in terms of these safeguards. Essentially saying that you know there are approaches that are being trying to be applied right now or being thought about, and those approaches about you know humans being dominant and AI being subservient to humans isn't going to work. And I think the reason why he says this is because if you kind of go with the definition of superintelligence, intelligence that he's talking about, or that a lot of the people in the field kind of talk about when it comes to superintelligence. Um, at some point, the idea is that there is going to be an entity of superintelligence that's going to surpass the capability, the intelligence, quote unquote intelligence of all of humanity, right? And
Hmm.
at which point, and you kind of, I read your paper, by the way. It was really well done, very well documented. But at one point, I think you even mentioned this in terms of like if it surpassed the capabilities and competencies of humans, like why would they care, or whatever. um I think essentially Hinton wouldn't necessarily say that. It's his approach of this maternal instinct, incorporating that into a possible safeguard, right, is a guarantee. I don't think he would say it's a guarantee, right? I think he's saying that we have a much better chance of avoiding future disaster if we follow that approach as opposed to the approaches that people are considering right now.
Which are what? Could you explain that? What the contrast between his approach and what he's arguing against?
Well, and I mean, you kind of touched on this in your paper when you're talking about like Asimov's rules of
Oh,
robotics and things like that. Essentially, creating some type of define, because the thing about especially transform. I mean, we don't know where the direction of the industry is going to go into the future, in the near future. But as of right now, like we're based off of a lot of the concern is really around the transformer architecture and large language models and kind of like what the spin-offs and developments based off of that technology. And so the thing with LLMs is that, and I know that you said that you were in that event a couple of weeks ago. So it was about the book by Eliezer Yudkowsky. He made it a point in that book that currently AI is being grown and not crafted. There's a difference. So like crafted would be kind of like the laws of robotics that you talk about in the where it's like a specific algorithm, they follow certain rules, whatever, right? But that's not necessarily how LLMs currently are working. It's more there I mean, artificial intelligence experts can't specifically point to an aspect of the code and say, okay, this is why it made this particular decision. It's really based off of reinforcement learning and training that's happening, right, and the data that's being provided. But a lot of that stuff is just kind of being almost like organically happening, right? So that's why I think like Hinton kind of getting back to Hinton and the maternal thing is he's saying that like the approach of like kind of using these very specific rules and stuff, like there's too many potentials for disaster in following that approach. And so that's why he's kind of talking about a more holistic type of approach to this, in incorporating some, and I have no idea. I don't know if he necessarily knows. I think like even in the interview he said that like, yeah, we're not anywhere close to like solving this problem, whatever. But it's just like I guess a line of thinking in terms of how to possibly address this that might be better off than these like static rules. that they're currently trying to be applied.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I understand your point that they're your point about them being sort of growing organically because we're not actually trying to program it specifically. We're giving them these large language models, these fields of knowledge that they're supposed to study and learn from and go where that takes them. So they're being grown almost like you would grow plants. You give them certain or feed you you're feeding them information and that is a subset of information we have and then letting them learn from that information and develop from it and go where it takes them. And that's why it's difficult to know exactly where it's going to take them because especially as these large language models get bigger and bigger and more comprehensive, we ourselves don't understand the whole picture. And will they come to the same conclusions we came to, or will they come out somewhere completely different? The unknown aspect of that is, I guess, what's scary. Um, so that we're training them, we're giving them an education, but we're not telling them specifically this means this or do this. We're just setting them loose in a kind of informational environment, and then they are supposed to develop and grow and almost like an organic, like you said, an organic thing, a plant or an animal. Uh, but because we're not in control of everything they learn and uh, what conclusions they will draw and what their behavior will be in light of those conclusions, that there's some element of fear there. Um, well, my response, I'm going to say that if they they can learn only what we have present to them. So I guess he's suggesting, I think that's what he's suggesting, is that we need to be careful what fields of knowledge or the whole universe of knowledge they're exposed to circumscribe that field so that we they don't uh, draw some conclusions that we can't anticipate. But the problem is, as they become more general, they will be able to do everything that we can do and beyond and better than we can. And that is I think, the fear here. So,
Yeah, I mean, you made a really good point in the paper in terms of like once it becomes this super intelligence, right? Like what stops it from questioning any type of guidance that we gave to it earlier on, or these, maternal instincts? Like, why wouldn't it just question that and say, oh, well, this is kind of doesn't really serve a purpose, or whatever, right? Whatever the reasoning is. Um, Again,
yeah,
I don't think that I think Hinton would I can't speak for him, but I would think that he would say, well, there's no guarantee. We're just trying to figure out like the best possible approach, not one that guarantees the solution.
yeah. And I actually don't see a solution with yeah, anywhere near guarantees, any more than we can predict our own the evolution of biological species. Could we have predicted our own if somehow there were some intelligence a million years ago that would predicted that we would have evolved here? It's uh, I don't know. That I think that's the source of the fear, the fact that we don't know. As long as artificial intelligence was focused on specific tasks, we know that the worst that your computer can do, that a calculator can do, is get the wrong answer because of some circuitry was wrong or some programming was wrong. The danger of purpose-built or tool-based AI is highly limited, but the general aspect is the part that is scary because humans are examples of general intelligence, not supposedly artificial, but natural general intelligence, and we have done some pretty dangerous things and may well yet do uh, worse things than anything we've done in the past. So anyway, but okay, so unless somebody else has any more comments on this aspect, I'm going to move on to what I think is actually more interesting, and this is the understanding of what intelligence is. Um, does anybody else have any comments on this so far? Okay. Um, I'm going to start with to approach this topic, the intelligence part. Um, Actually, by discussing something that's at the very end of the long write-up, which is not in the short write-up up there, um, because it's sort of backwards here. Because I think this is more to the point of the philosophical problems with what's going on here, and not the artificial natural part of it. And that is, I'm going to start. This is going to seem like it's off topic, but I'm going to try to connect it with our topic. Before I'm going to start out by discussing um, a couple of scientific experiments or experimental conclusions. They were One of them is having to do with um, uh, human attentiveness, how flawed humans are, and why AI might be looked to as a way to correct or enhance our flaws, and because I think this is partly what um, the reason people who are proponents of AI think it's a good thing, because it will make up for our flaws, the things we're not that good at, and along comes AI and it will help us. It will be a positive force in human development, or the development of of human life and or life. So I'm going to begin with this is I'm going to read this because rather than ad lib it through, because and I'll pause occasionally, rather because I tend to wander if I try to ad lib. There's a famous experiment from about 15 years ago or something, or no, more than that, 1999, 25 years ago. It was popularly called "Gorillas in Our Midst." It's in the form of a video, which you can find on YouTube. The experimental part is only about 20 seconds long. It's been viewed 32 million times, and you could go there yourself, and you can find the link to it, or just look it up. It's easy to find. The I'll start by reading this. I'm going to build on an observation made by Teppo Felin, a researcher in behavioral economics at Oxford. Felin addresses an idea that's current in much literature in psychology and economics and AI research, that humans are impeded by cognitive biases to the point that we could stand to overcome them or enlist help to compensate for them. That we are basically, if we're full of biases, if we could get rid of this, we'd be better off, basically, is the idea. AI, for example, can sample not only faster but more objectively vast amounts of information that environments present to them than people can. We, it seems, can focus on things, but this focus can make us blind to much that is obvious to an intelligence capable of perceiving and organizing more comprehensively than us. In other words, focus is bias. Bias is bad, or suboptimal at least. That seems to be the suggestion, right? And this is the famous experiment. It's by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris. It's called selective attention test. It's a psychological test that was originally done in 1989, and this is the one you can find the YouTube video of this on easily. I'll explain it though. I'm going to ruin the kind of the test for you by telling you what actually happened, but you can take it yourself if you want. Basically, it's this. There's a test video, and it's barely 20 seconds long, and you get to watch 6 people passing what looks like a basketball to each other. 3 are wearing black, and 3 are wearing white, and the test taker, you, the observer who's watching the video, is asked to count how many times the people wearing white pass the ball. The task is not difficult, but does require some concentration. You have to literally keep your eye on the ball to make it do the count correctly. And by the way, the correct answer is 15, and you could try it yourself. Okay, and most test takers who get it right, those who pay attention, it requires concentration, but it's not extremely difficult. And so what does this mean? It means that people can focus, at least for 20 seconds, on a very specific task. Okay? So far, so good. But at the end of the test, the people who took the test are asked how many of them noticed that a gorilla walked through the middle of the ball passing activity. Surprisingly, about 70% are dumbfounded when asked. They didn't notice any gorilla. But in fact, there was a person in a gorilla suit who pranced through the middle of the proceedings, even thumping his chest to draw attention to himself. And most people did not notice this gorilla. And they were so concentrated on counting the ball passes. To someone who was not prompted with any task beforehand requiring focus, that is, if you were watching the video and they didn't tell you to do anything, just watch it and remember what strikes you about it. For those people, the gorilla was obvious. In fact, it may be the most salient thing in the video, but not to those trying to count ball passes, even though it was happening right in front of their face. It was a psychological experiment, and the usual conclusion that people draw from this, including some very famous people like Daniel Kahneman, another Nobel laureate who was famous for his book called Thinking Fast and Slow. The conclusion that most people draw is that we are very biased when we have an agenda, when we're specifically told to do something. We're so focused on that, we tend not to notice other things. And that's the suggestion seems to be there's something wrong with that. It would be nice, wouldn't it, if we could be attentive to all the information in our visual field and not be so focused. A machine, an AI, for example, watching the same video would notice everything about it, not just the ball passing, but what the color of the hair of the participants, what was in the background, what kind of doors or what the wall looked like behind them, and of course would have noticed the gorilla. But humans have trouble with that. We focus when we have an agenda, when we're trying to do something. We are able to focus to a degree, to an extent, but in so doing, we block out everything else, and that can be a problem, and that's the flaw. That's what some people think. When an AI could be more intelligent than us if it could escape these biases. It would be immune to these biases, and in that way, it would be a superior intelligence, a superior navigator of the world than humans are. That's the thought that many people get from this examination. But okay, well, let's see. But Ferdinand, who criticizes this experiment and criticizes people like Daniel Kahneman and the people who draw this conclusion, asks these questions. He says, why would one think that peripheral blindness induced by focus is problematic? In other words, is this really a bias? Is this a problem? Isn't it adaptive for the survival of a species to focus on tasks that require concentration? Doesn't much problem solving happen this way? Humans, like all living things, have a major agenda, and that is to survive. We have the abilities, we do, because evolutionarily they have helped us to survive. And surely focus is one of them. If focus entails ignoring what is not relevant to the task at hand, and we have survived up to this point by occasionally focusing on a part of reality at the expense of the rest, hasn't this been adaptive? That it's good. Where we are today is because we've been good at this, being biased, to being focused. Isn't intelligence supposed to be at least adaptive, whatever other end it may serve? If intelligence implied attending to all corners of reality, regardless of the relevance of such omniscience to the agenda that finite beings with finite resources have, would we still call it intelligent? In other words, we are finite in our capabilities. We can only have so much attention to give to things, and so we're very selective in how we give that attention away. And why? Because we don't have forever. We don't have infinite resources. And that ability, that knack for focus, for literally being biased, for not seeing the entire world for what it is why we are here. We would have died out long ago if we weren't able to focus. So we have to be careful about calling this bias maladaptive. In other words, intelligence, at least in human understanding, seems to be connected to survival. If an entity cannot do what it needs to do to survive, it's hard for us to say that it's an intelligent thing. We have managed that, and that's why we refer to things that, like us and other animals that manage to survive, as being having a degree, at least a degree of intelligence. Because intelligence is, for us, for biological beings, is related to survival. If you, it's not just raw knowledge about just knowledge with no meaning or purpose or agenda, or it's not, it's selective knowledge that helps you make it through the day, so to speak. Okay, so one can draw the conclusion, and Feline does, that blindness to large portions of reality that biases cause is a feature, not a bug, of beings like us, and it's not necessarily a defect we need to correct. So if an AI didn't have this defect because of its comprehensive ability to take in all this information, would we call that intelligence? It's an ability, it's a capability, but this is a mistake he's trying to suggest we make. Having a capability, even if it's a superior capability at something, is not the same as intelligence. Intelligence is connected with having a specific goal, and and uh, and in human history, that goal is in living, the history of living things, is connected with survival. And the only things that need to worry about survival are things that are alive that might not survive, that are finite in terms of what the resources and how long they're going to be here. Things that don't have that restriction don't have a need to be focused to. They don't have a problem with. They don't have any problems, literally, that humans with finite capabilities do have. And its intelligence is defined, at least human understandable intelligence is defined in terms of that finite capability. So something with infinite capability but no agenda is difficult to say that's intelligence. It's a force of nature, maybe, but we don't think of gravity or earthquakes or the sun as intelligent because they have tremendous power. The mistake here is to equate tremendous capability with intelligence, which is that's the suggestion here. So to get back to the experiment, one of the things that there's something else to notice about this gorillas in the mist experiment, which I want to point out, and this goes beyond what Philippe said. It's something I noticed. So we might stop here and think that, okay, focus is a good thing. The ability to focus on a project or an agenda because it helps you survive. It does seem, like it's a good thing, at least for biological beings. And 70% of those who didn't see the gorilla were good at survival because they were able to stay on task. They were able to count the number of ball passes the people in white made. So there's no argument that people's ability to focus to some degree, at least, is a good thing, at least good for their survival. Okay, but not so fast. Not if this is not quite true if it's being implied that the rest, the 30%, those who didn't do so well at counting the ball passes, are somehow a drag on the survival of the species. Some people just aren't very focused. Does that mean there's something wrong with them? Well, what's interesting here is these 30%, those who were not very good at keeping track of the ball, how many ball passes there were, most of them did see the gorilla. The suggestion perhaps they have trouble with focus and they're easily distracted, but to the unfocused, the gorilla is quite a distraction. It isn't their relative inattentiveness. I'm sorry, but their very inattentiveness, their inability to focus is also adaptive. It's also been evolutionarily selected for. Why? Because suppose that had been a real gorilla, they would be attuned to the danger, whereas those people too focused on the ball passing might have missed it. In other words, a little bit of attention deficit disorder might be evolutionary adaptive for a community. In other words, you need people who maybe we do need most people to be able to focus and to be productive, and because they're able to focus their attention on things, they can create things and solve problems. That's good. You can imagine how that's useful for a population as far as survival goes. But apparently, you need people who are not so good at that too. People who do have trouble with focus, who are distracted, who notice things they're not supposed to notice, because they too can contribute to uh, their behavior can be adaptive. It can help the community survive and pass on its genetic heritage, simply by being attuned to things which the others miss. In evolutionary history, that this partly explains why we have recessive traits that don't go away. Why is it that on the surface things that you think are not good for people, why do they keep? Why haven't they been weeded out uh, by natural selection a long time ago? Another example I could bring up is optimism and pessimism. And this makes a reference to another important experiment from 13 years ago. There's a TED talk about this that there's a link to there. This involves Tali Sharot. She's a British neuroscientist who studied the brain and was trying to find out the correlations between which part of our brains are connected with orientations toward the world that make some people more optimistic and other people more pessimistic about, especially when you're faced with challenging situations. Through various technical means, they were able to find which part of the brain that's involved in that, or primarily involved. It's the inferior frontal gyrus. I think it's the upper left-hand corner of your brain. And they're able to find out that, I mean, they were able to manipulate that part of the brain temporarily by interfering with its function and seeing how it affected people's optimism or not, or pessimism. And they were able actually to turn it on and off. They could make optimistic, or people who are ordinarily optimistic, become pessimistic for a short time until that part of the brain recovered. Um, and by the way, some background here. It's kind of obvious evolutionarily why it is. The majority of people, something like 80% of people, have a tendency to be on the optimistic side of the spectrum. There's a spectrum of optimism. There's people who are extremely optimistic, people who are somewhat optimistic. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, but 80% of people are classified as optimist. There's a 20% of people who tend to look on the dark side, especially when the odds look bad. Um, so that's the background information. So, and it's understandable why that that balance, that overabundance of optimism in most people would be there, because evolutionarily, whenever we've been challenged, if you're up against a situation, a do or die situation where you maybe your chances of survival are not very good, but you still you're going to fight to the end. You're going to take every opportunity you can to survive. You would think that those people who thought they could still do something in the face of terrible odds, as opposed to people who would simply throw up their hands and give up and say and be fatalist and say it's over, I'm done. Even when the odds are equally against both types of people, those who hang in there and soldier on, you would think would have a better chance of surviving, and that their genes would be represented in the wider human community more so than the pessimist. And that's correct. That maybe explains why 80% of us are more or less optimist. But it doesn't explain, at least not by itself, why there's 20% of people who are not in that category. How come those people didn't get weeded out? They should have disappeared a long time ago, but they're not. There's a very persistent minority of people who tend to look on the dark side. And why is that? Again, this is an example of a recessive characteristic that's not dominant, but it never goes away. And very similarly to the previous experiment, the explanation, or at least an explanation for it, is that yes, you need some people who are pessimistic, because being optimistic especially the extreme forms of it, can be toxic. Like extreme cases are people who jump off cliffs expecting to evolve wings on the way down. Those people are not going to pass their genes on. But if you think that's just exaggerating, go look at the Darwin Awards. You'll find incredible examples of people doing, these are real examples, I made up ones, of people doing incredibly stupid things because they seem to believe they can do things that a realist or a pessimist would be very clear you can't do that. But there is optimism can be toxic too. And so, what role do the pessimists play? Well, pessimism is very closely related to realism. Sometimes you need people who look on the dark side to remind you of what the real, they often have a clearer picture of reality than optimists do. Uh, this may not help them, personally, but it does help them, the community they're part of, because their contribution to the survival of the species is they uh, keep us more in tune with reality, or at least try to, despite the fact that they were overwhelmed often by the optimist. So there is a obvious adaptive, evolutionarily adaptive function for people who are pessimists. They haven't disappeared for a very good reason, because we may need some people to tell us sometimes what reality really is like. So they contribute as well. Just like back in the earlier experiment about attention deficit, you need some people who are not very good focusers because they often see things that people who are very good at focusing do not see. All of this is to show that these biases or failings that a lot of people take to be somewhat like disabilities may probably do serve an actual important function in our survival, and that intelligence is not exhausted by people who are extremely optimistic and able to focus. Maybe you need some people who are flawed in that way. And to the extent that AI actually helps ma- uh, validate the positive side of this, the people who we think are able to problem solve, for example, people who are focusing is very close to closely related to problem solving, and AIs are supposedly what they're very good at is problem solving. The same thing, say, extreme facility at problem solving is not the same thing as intelligence, or is intelligence include that, but it also includes us uh, having a wider understanding of the world, that it doesn't necessarily see the world as about just exclusively about problem solving. Um, anyway, I've gone on for ways here. Maybe I should pause here. So let me sum up my point now. Let people talk a little bit more. My point was simply that uh, a lot of the things that people, psychologists and neuroscientists and people who study the human mind sometimes point to as disabilities or things that are holding us back. There's a reason why those things are there, why they have survived. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's good for the individuals who are suffering from, because pessimists do tend to suffer a little bit more than optimists from depression. Um, and maybe that's not good for them. But there's a reason why there are depressed people in the world, and it may be that our very survival depends on there being depressed people that are vulnerable to being depressed in the world. Too many people who are incapable of being depressed would be that such a population may not survive from because as I said earlier, optimism can be toxic, and also extreme ability to focus and problem solve through focus can be also uh, not conducive to our survival as a species. So I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any thoughts about this. Angie, go ahead.
So you actually answer my question about AI talk. So when you talk about bias, it really reminded me about psychologist Lee Ross when he talked in one of his podcasts. He said people really cannot escape naive realism because we are all biased. We believe our reality is going to be the truth of the world, even though it's not. However, it's very important that we realize our own naive realism. And so, back to your attention deficit experiment, um, I think the danger is that when this group of people who miss, quote unquote, miss the gorilla, adamantly say that there was no gorilla, and that was the danger of not realizing their naive realism. Um, how I what I'm really interested right now with this all AI talk is that there are a lot of people with high credentials in AI who are either very optimistic or pessimistic about the future of AI, obviously. And tying it to naive realism, I'm really interested. What did they experience? What did they see in their life that make them conclude either they are optimistic or pessimistic about AI? And you just give me the answer is that pessimists need to exist to contribute to the survival of humanity. I mean, great, there are people who are optimistic about AI reaching singularity. However, there are people who are pessimistic, and these people are the one who will try to implement the safeguards in AI. So that was really good. That really answered why there are two sides of AI talk in highly credentialed people. And the second thing is that I'm I'm still curious about our fascination in supreme being. Why? I mean, we created God before. That's another supreme being now, and we created uh, artificial chess master, another supreme being. Now we're trying to create AGI, reaching singularity, a supreme being, and it's not enough that it has to be super intelligent. It has to be empathetic. Um, it has to reach a lot of criteria to become fulfilling in a lot of aspect of humanity. I mean, and you touch on one of the answer that enhancements, like we're trying to create enhancement in our life, but you know I with the complexity of humanity, I believe that we cannot put everybody into the same bucket. I'm sure everybody has different agenda, different answer why we need a supreme being in our life. I mean, enhancement is just one of the answer, and I'm still interested to see why we still need to rely on the existence of supreme being. That's my comment. Thank you so much for presenting your thoughts. Really good.
Thank you, Angie. If you mean by supreme being, like God, or uh, like why do people believe in God? That's another topic, really. We actually did a long, long, long time ago. Maybe in I I don't. Yeah, it's a very different topic. I um, but Jack, go ahead. Do you have a Jack?
Yeah. So I've got a couple questions, or at least, yeah, one question, a couple comments. So my question is, so in terms of your definition or the definition you're using in the paper for intelligence, is I'm guessing you're saying survival is a requirement for intelligence?
Well, it seems we are the arbiters. Human beings are up to these, at least up to this point, because AGI hasn't is not a reality yet. But but at least up to this point in history, we are the arbiters. We decide what is intelligence and what isn't. We decide how we judge other people, whether they're intelligent, to what extent animals are intelligent, or to what extent behavior in anywhere in the natural world isn't. We label it intelligent behavior, and because it makes sense to us that something would behave that way if it wants to persist. And that survival, of course, is closely connected with being the finite entities we are. We're limited in our time here, our resources, our abilities. If our abilities and capabilities were infinite, we wouldn't have a problem with survival, and we wouldn't have problems at all that could be connected with, that we wouldn't have. We, the problem with artificial intelligence is because these things aren't alive. They're not in principle going to die. Uh, they could destroy them, or they could be destroyed perhaps by something, but it wouldn't be a sad thing for them anymore. They would be a happy thing. The thing is, these emotions, these assessments, these judgments we have about something being good, bad, beautiful, or ugly, correct or incorrect, are all things, these normative judgments, they call it in philosophy, are all rooted in the fact that we have values. And those values are rooted in the fact that we are concrete, finite beings with limited everything. And to entities such as an artificial one that in theory has no limits, it's difficult to relate what intelligence could possibly mean to such a thing. It except insofar as we would judge that thing as intelligent, and we would judge it intelligently if it was able to serve some purpose we have. If it's going to destroy us, we wouldn't judge it as intelligent. That's another point I make in the paper. We would judge it as like a natural, as I would have said in the past, an act of God or a natural disaster, like the sun exploding or a geothermal event that killed us. It's not. It's nature, blind nature, doing its thing, but it's not intelligent. Intelligence is a predicate we uh, bestow on things that we can see a utility, a survival utility for finite beings. If it's not relatable to that, it's just a force of nature, a capability, raw but not intelligent. That was what I was going to say, Jack. I don't know if that
Okay.
helped.
So, because you'd said intelligence is not just problem solving, but a wider view of the world. I'm trying to figure out what does that mean, a wider view of the world.
It means that intelligence is only meaningful for beings that are limited in their perspective on the world, and limited in every way. So a being that is not inherently uh, finite or limited, the term as we use the term, as it evolved in human culture, doesn't apply to those things any more than it applies to physical, things like acts of natural disasters, for example. You know, the
Well, I mean, it is limited though, right? I mean, like in terms of resources,
you're talking.
it's not something supernatural. It's not God. I'm talking about some future artificial intelligence. There would be some limits to that entity.
You mean like, for example, extreme AI does consume vast amounts of electricity. Therefore, you have to have all these data centers, and that
Well,
is that what you mean? That he has to use electricity to operate, and that is limited. Is that what you mean?
well, like you were saying, I mean, if we take a look at this attention issue in the gorilla experiment, so there's evolutionary selections, and probably a lot of that had to do with. I mean, I don't know, but I would imagine some of that had to do with resources, right? And yeah, I mean, certainly driven the idea of survival of the species, right? But there were certainly resource considerations, or I mean, not that evolution is it's hard to talk about this stuff without anthropomorphizing, but essentially, like there are some resource limitations to humans in terms of like what we can pay attention to, what we can think about. I mean, I think the same is going to be true for artificial intelligence, just because of it's not like it has an infinite amount of resources spanning the entire universe. At least not initially. Anyway, I mean, I don't know if that would ever happen. I guess that's in the realm of speculation. But I mean, in terms of limitations, there are going to be some limitations to it.
Hmm. Um, but okay, as I discussed this at length here in the write-up, and that's the notion of affect or feeling, because that's when we Hinton talks about maternal instincts, uh, he does talk in an extended lecture as though he's talking about more than just uh, ba- uh, putting boundaries or restrictions on what our AGI can do. He's talking about instilling things that are analogous to feelings that humans have, such as obviously maternal instincts, to the 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 impulse to want to care about another being. Um, and I talk about the relation to that of all that to moral theory, which is a little bit of a side issue here, but um, I don't see how feelings, in any sense of the word, of any kind of feeling, even malice, nothing. In other words, the terms good and evil, happy, sad, even satisfactory or unsatisfactory apply to a machine. Um, the word that what I can see is that okay, it's got certain instructions. It follows those instructions. If some obstacle gets in the way of it following those instructions, it does what it's programmed to do in facing that obstacle. If it succeeds, fine. If it fails, fine. Or maybe the fine isn't the word. It doesn't matter to it whether it succeeds or not. Okay, you cannot put mattering. Mattering is in philosophy. Mattering is like the term everyday term for normativity. That is, when things have value of some sort, they matter. It's why would anything matter to an AI? It would just follow instructions until it couldn't follow instructions anymore, and then it stops following instructions, and that's it. Nothing more to be said about it. It doesn't have any agenda, like living things have an agenda. They want to survive until they can't anymore. Uh, why would an AI want to do that? I mean, the very point is it doesn't have wants uh, or desires or affects or feel this way or that way about anything. It's that part that I find mysterious about AGI. If you're going to mix it up with things like maternal instincts, that is. Now, if you're just going to say a thing is extremely capable of doing things, accomplishing things, that's fine. It's got capability, but don't put in things like intelligence and affect into there because those are very biologically terms that are evolved from in and among uh, biological beings. Um,
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say um, to that is, and like it's hard to know how the future is going to unfold, obviously, uh, but I can't dismiss the possibility of it happening. Like the possibility of being able to program empathy into a computer somehow, or it, having artificial intelligence develop wants and things like that. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to dismiss. I mean, not to say that it's not impossible. It certainly could be impossible
mhm.
for that to happen, and maybe I completely agree with you if that's the case. But the thing is, we don't know what the future can unfold. Like, I mean, if you uh, talk to people 20 years ago in terms of like where we're at with artificial intelligence, they would have said maybe something similar in terms of the capabilities that's being presented now, even like 5 or 10 years ago. Well, I definitely know that because Melanie Mitchell, who wrote, book Artificial Intelligence, she is completely in shock in
Oh,
terms of like what happened with the transformer model. But anyway, so yeah, I would just say that. And in terms of like what you're talking about before about like Kahneman, I forget the guy's name that you're quoting regarding the systemic errors and defects and things like that. I don't know if we can necessarily say that Kahneman just like says, the resulting biases are. I mean, he says it. I think he's saying defects in terms of relative to goals, right? And that's different in terms of just saying it's a defect. Because some biases are, and you kind of pointed this out too. Some biases are adaptive. Many produce systemic errors and in real harms, but it really comes down to context. It comes down to, and a lot of this again, it goes back to the survival of the species and things like that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. It has to do with context. So, but the point is, the word bias has a kind of negative connotation, whereas we need a term
Well,
for a leaning in this direction versus that direction, related to a goal that you're trying to achieve. So, a focus sounds like a
well, it's
more
negative to goal. It's a negative to the goal. It depends on what the goal is.
yeah. And since you could have multiple goals simultaneously, is what makes this complicated with human beings. Yeah, uh, it's. I mean, it isn't. He acknowledges that focus is obviously very important ability to problem solve, obviously, and to the extent that people can do that, they're good. They're probably going to do well, and they're going to pass on their genes because they can solve problems. Uh, but it isn't the only thing that people need to survive. They also need to be a general awareness that often can, in some contexts, be counterproductive. And when it's counterproductive, you call it a bias. But the very same thing can be productive in another way. Like it can help you be aware of things that the focused people are not paying attention to. And that in that way, and that they ought to pay attention to if they want to survive, such as a real gorilla versus a person in a gorilla suit. Um, but I want to get back to something else you said about the capability, the huge advance in capability of AI over time, and how we can't predict where it's going to go in the future. Um, there's another problem, which I also mentioned in the longer write-up. That okay, let's go with the possibility that, and to some extent, this is already that I'm sort of alluded to at the beginning, that although I find it very difficult to see how a machine's ever going to have uh, affect or feeling or the same understanding of those things that biological things would have. But let's suppose they do. Somehow they evolve something that is analogous, at least, to feelings, and for all the world to us seems like they feel. They're able to get angry, to get sad, to be content, to do a lot of the things. Let's suppose they do. They begin to behave in ways that we start to think that thing is really feeling something, like maternal instincts, for example. What's going to happen then? Thomas Metzinger, who I did a whole meetup on him a couple of years ago, uh, brings up the issue of, and to some extent this is already true, but it will become extremely true if this reality of machines start making us believe they can actually feel. We start getting into moral issues about to what extent machines or artificially intelligent beings will have to be incorporated into our moral world, so to the point where we have to say we have to show respect and concern for their well-being. It will no longer be acceptable to throw away your machine any more than it would be to kill a person or an animal without good reason. We have to start giving machines rights and duties and start giving them regard the way we would give living things regard, because they're able to feel, become sentient. To the extent they become sentient and start behaving like they understand a sense of self-worth or dignity, then they have to be incorporated into our moral theories. And that means that that could mean that we're no longer dealing with just inert matter. When you look at your computer, you have to start being concerned about how you treat it. Um, that's it, that this assumes that we are able to get to a place where we convincingly have created artificial intelligences that seem to express sentience. They're able to feel pain and pleasure. Then we owe them moral consideration. And that's going to complicate our world a lot in the same way it happens with animals. Uh, Attributing how most people who have normal sentiments don't feel it's okay to treat an animal uh, as though it were a rock or a stone, with no concern for its well-being because it has feelings, so to speak. Um, what's that going to do to our perspective on the world? It could be that we may uh, go ahead, Wendell. Uh, Wendell, you had your hand up.
Oh, hello, 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 wonderful humans. Thank you. So I've been listening, and of course, I'm trying to um, get different perspectives and everything. I'm just a somewhat regular, somewhat human being trying to, make sense out of stuff. And like gathering information. So I've seen, because, you try to gather little bits of information and then extrapolate and manipulate and do all that good stuff. So I remember seeing this movie. I think it's called Automata, Automata, with I think it was Melanie Griffith and Antonio Banderas, about a dystopian future and a self-aware robot automaton kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, with people on both sides, voicing concerns that, oh, artificial intelligence and stuff like that. And I'm figuring, is it going to be a kind of like a take on that Star Trek movie with V'ger, where it was sent out to, gather information and send it back to its creator? But then it took one of the carbon-based fragile life forms and then replicated it in a more robust fashion, kind of thing. Will it get to a point where it makes its own stuff, so to speak, sentient beings to go out and gather bits of information in different ways? Because as far as humans go, what I've learned is, with our senses, our eyes and ears and stuff like that, um, the skin, we have very limited in the scope of the electromagnetic spectrum to detect with what we have, as opposed to certain other animals like snakes. They taste the air, for different molecules, and then they put that in, and their brain calculates that, I guess, prey is somewhere close by, kind of thing. And I don't think humans could do that. They're like bees, and I guess some other insects, they see flowers differently with their receptive, their eyes. So they would see a field of flowers, and it would appear differently to them, because scientists, they're like, hey, let's see, experiment and see what is going on here. Certain animals hear higher and lower in the sound frequency than humans. So is that going to, and I think you were mentioning that, you were alluding to, if this AI would say, hey, get that spark and say, let me try to accumulate as much knowledge as possible, which for me personally is, that has become my high of reading scientific layman things to gain knowledge, as opposed to watching what I call reality shows, about which, drama, if you will, the human drama. But it's like that is my high, so to speak, as like the reward mechanism, where you're like, oh, yes, this is what, I've been wondering about this. And somebody is researching something, and then you find the paper on it, or the article, and you're like, oh, this is the gist of it. um so I guess you wondered, or some people would be like, yeah, the AI is going to take over once it starts doing this, because it definitely needs power. And will it extrapolate, into the future? Will it, is it not extrapolate? Will it, uh, future state say, hey, this planet is going to be absorbed by its sun, and if I'm to gather more information, will it say, hey, I've, developed this machine that operates on this, some sort of power that it could go out from this planet and let it burn up and continue searching and gathering, knowledge kind of. I hope I didn't lose everybody.
Hmm.
Life is good. I'm wondering, like I said, I'm wondering stuff. Will it get to that? Because I think in the Automata movie, towards the end, one of the robots made an upgrade, which is I think it was a millipede type thing. The evolution, the next
Hmm.
evolution of machines.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have any more comments right now? I just wanted to add a little bit to what I was saying earlier about if machines at some AI at some point is able to uh, evolve things like feelings and values and the kinds of things that maternal instinct seems to be suggesting. Um, and Thomas Metzinger actually puts it, I think, or he implies this. He says that um, either AI will never get to that point. It will always be cold and extremely capable and extremely powerful, but not have any of those things that biological beings are either equipped with, like emotions and values and so forth, partly connected with the fact that they're finite, or it won't, or it will. Maybe it will develop these things. If it does, then there will be a different kind of problem, because a lot of our affects and feelings aren't, at least half of them, aren't positive. People can be cruel. People can be malicious. Machines, if an AI can be maternal, it could also be sadistic. Uh, these are all human uh, traits, and that are connected with affect. So there's that. Go ahead, Jack. I think you have your.
Yeah. So before you were talking about, yeah. So if AI did develop emotions, and it would be a moral dilemma. How do we treat them? Do they become sentient? Things like that. So again, I haven't watched Hinton's presentation, but I would imagine Hinton would love that. I mean, because there's some sort of mutual coordination that's happening on another level between humans and AI. I mean, it's just just
Yeah.
in terms of like what he would think about that. But in terms of like what you're just talking about with the AI being if it's maternal, it could be malicious or cruel, um, or sadistic. Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, for a couple of things. One is, I would say, if this this idea of implementing emotions and empathy, specifically maternalistic instincts, and so, if that were ever to be a possibility, likely I would imagine it would not be a one-to-one. It wouldn't necessarily be what humans experience. It wouldn't be an exact match. It might be, right? But likely it wouldn't. I mean, just because of yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say, but my guess is it would be different, only because in the past, like as humans have developed technology, like when we were trying to replicate flight, we couldn't recreate a bird, nor did we want to. We ended up creating planes, right? It got us into the air. It functioned the way we wanted it to, but it's an approximation. It's not an exact match, right, to what happens in nature.
Hmm.
And so, like, yeah, I would think that this idea of maternal instincts or whatever would be an approximation. It would not necessarily be an exact match. It would be just enough to do the job, but nothing, nothing beyond that. But in terms of like, yeah, the sadism, the maliciousness, I mean, that's going to be a continuing problem, even if we never get to AGI. Like, I mean, technology and artificial intelligence is going to continue to be used by bad actors for malicious purposes.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah,
that's it.
but I can imagine a really super intelligent bad actor with malicious instinct would really be that would be I don't that could be worse than extinction. That it could
Yeah.
be this AGI might not, at least a neutral, affectless. I don't care. Human beings are barely curious. You're curious things, but I don't particularly dislike them, but I don't like them. So let's just ignore them. There's that, and so it may destroy us out of from absent-mindedly, not because it's trying to kill us, because we're just not significant. Like we might swat a mosquito, for example.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and Hinton would agree with you. That's why he's saying 10 to
okay,
20% chance.
but it could be even worse than that. It could be that it likes torturing us. It doesn't want to kill us right away. It's going to want to, if it's sadistic, if it's capable of maternal instincts, it's capable of extremely negative feelings, and we may be in. It could be worse than extinction. We could be kept alive just for the benefit of seeing us react to pain and suffering. Maybe we might want to do that for. Why do people do this? You know, if it came close to doing imitating human affect, why wouldn't it? Um, there's
Have you read, have you heard of Rocco's Basilisk?
what who was that again?
Rocco's Basilisk?
No, I haven't.
So it's kind of it's in line with what you're just talking about. I mean, in terms of like a future AI
Yeah,
that will punish human and to it's this like information hazard that came out of like the rationality
yeah,
community, Eliezer Yudkowsky. But the idea is that like if if you're not working on super intelligence right now, right, and at some point in the future the super intelligence gets created, it will be able to go back in history records and find out who it was that was arguing against it and be able to like I guess recreate based off of some DNA information or whatever, recreate that human and torture him for eternity.
yeah. All right. So yeah, there's another, but okay, those are extreme cases where okay, maybe AI never gets to be super AI. It just becomes okay. Two possibilities. It stays um, as a AI tool indefinitely. A very capable tool, but still under our control and not a danger to our existence. That's one possibility. The other extreme is that it decides to do away with us. There's a middle ground there, and that can also be problematic. And this is what I think I mentioned earlier, Thomas Metzinger. At one point, he says that he thinks that it's very possible that that AI will be more or less cause. Let's see what's the right. Let me if I can find the right. That we will be the oppressors of AI if they actually become sentient to a degree, that they're more likely to be tortured by us than they will torture us. That we will abuse them. We will not only do we abuse animals in the ecosystem in the world, but we're going to create new beings that we're going to torture, we're going to enslave, we're going to exploit. Uh, that aren't here now. We're going to create non-existent victims on top of those victims we already have exploited in the world. That they will suffer. And an example of this, and this is actually was a topic by itself years ago. There's a link to it in the extended write-up about sex and robots, about sex robots. Years ago, there was a whole book written about this, about how if robots really become able to at least convey the feeling of affect that convincingly enough, and there already are attempts to humanize their form to make them look like males and females. That it well, the title of the piece maybe says it all. It says, "Will no still mean no when a robot says it?" If a robot, if a human being wants to have sex with a robot and she or he says no, and we have control over it and we force it, will that be considered rape? Believe it or not, this has been considered, and the European Parliament actually is starting to think about this, and they're starting to modify the law on what kinds of entities can be forced into sex, can be raped. And they're starting to consider the possibility that if sex robots become significantly advanced, that they appear to have feelings, that to force a robot into sex would be considered an act of rape under the law. This is not like super intelligence that's so powerful they can destroy us, nor something that doesn't have anything close to being human-like, but something right very close to being human-like. And how will we interact with those kinds of AI, especially if they take human form, and the moral issues that brings up. It sounds very bizarre, but there's a whole paper about this, which you can find a link to that I did years ago. It's that middle ground between super AI that simply treats us like a bug, an insect, and AI that remains a tool under our control. There's the middle ground there that is also full of uh, fraught with problems, I think. I don't know if anybody's um, guess any interested in that, but it seems to me that there I don't can't make any predictions. I'm not an AI person, but I mean a technically trained person in anything like artificial intelligence, but I do know something about philosophy of mind and concepts and moral theory, which is my area that I probably know most about, and how humans interact with themselves, with other things in the world, and how we have and what we're capable of, and why we do that. And that's actually a real fear. His fear is that we will abuse AI if it's in the middle ground. If we're capable of it, we will, just like we abuse each other. Uh, anyway, does anybody have any thoughts about any of this? Does any maybe I should ask people how many people that are here? There's only what 6 or 7 of us here. Um, are are really afraid that AI is going to be a danger, or you don't think it's ever going to happen? That will there'll be a danger to humanity. Go ahead, Wendell.
Oh,
Okay,
uh,
okay, I see. Go ahead, Jack. I think Wendell. Go ahead, Jack. I see your hand.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, uh, definitely is it possible? Yes. Is it could it potentially be disastrous? Yes. Could it be benign? Yes. Could it be, this future abundance? Yes. I mean, like, I really, there's a lot of people have these, what is it, probability of doom things where they apply a probability to the chance that, like, kind of what Hinton was doing with the 10 to 20% ability of AI kills us all. I don't. It's hard for me to apply probability to this stuff because, again, I don't think it's it doesn't make any sense to try to do this. Like we just don't know. There's certainly actions that we can take in order to just like anything else. There's certain actions that we can try to. I should say try to take because there are some things like international agreements and things like that we have been tried in the past with like things like nuclear biological weapons and things like that on face value looks obviously rational and people agree to it, but then you have shadow programs going on in the back. So anyway, so there's that. In terms of what you were talking about before though, oh, thank you for mentioning Metzinger. Yeah, like I'm gonna read this paper now. It looks super interesting, what you're describing. And but yeah, it makes me think. I mean, like, yeah, we're the oppressors of AI and sex robot. Like, I mean, this is just kind of the history of humanity. This is like what we do. Colonization, leveraging labor. I mean, right now we have, even though child labor is illegal, um, humans are still taking advantage of it. We've got children working cobalt mines in order to, create materials for our laptops and cell phones. Like, I mean, this is just kind of what we do, and I mean there's outrage, and like there's outrage about a bunch of other things, but ultimately, I mean, somebody made the point. When was it, last night or the night before? I don't know. I was in a group and somebody was making the point in terms of How a couple of years ago or a few years ago there was outrage about environmental concerns, climate change, things like that, right? Especially in the Silicon Valley area. And now that's kind of gone to the wayside because AI is requiring so much electricity and power, and there's this race against China. Is that like that is no longer, I mean, for some, yeah, there's definitely activists that are still pushing it, but for a lot of people in the population, if it was ever a concern, there's like now this refocus on artificial, whatever it takes, essentially, in order to develop this thing before China gets it. So anyway, it goes back to this idea of leveraging labor, taking advantage of others, colonization, etc. I mean, this is just kind of an aspect of human nature. It's a dark aspect of human nature, but it's a part of human nature.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jack. Wendell, go ahead.
Thanks. So, like I said, with the gathering of information, um, it's got some. It should AI should have scientific information that recognizes that we are one species as far as humans go. But because of the pursuit of capital, we've been taught that we're different races, we're mixed breeds, it's a whole bunch of crap that's unscientific but social construct. So with AI, is AI going to say it's a different race than humans? And since it would extrapolate that all gods are imaginary, and I don't know if its goal is going to be that it's got to be profitable. It's got to have the most money on the planet in order to be valid. I think those are the things that will come into play because it's going to be like, hey, if you notice it, it's humans who have false concepts that are harming each other for the sake of profit or for the sake of whichever God is the one true God or whatever it is. Because you mentioned about I think it's the 80-20 with the optimist and the pessimist. And I think you also mentioned about the psychopaths who have no empathy, but the ones who, and the smaller number who pretend that they do, which are, more dangerous. So it's going to be like, hey, we just got to get rid of the whole bunch because I don't know which one, which are the bad apples, and it's going to try to take me out. So I've got to take it out first, if that's the logic. But like that's the logic of a psychopath, as opposed to hey, live and let live kind of situation. And was there a movie about that? Was it like Alien? Is it or what was it? Not Alien. It was and I think they made a show about it too. Anyway, or a couple of different ones. Anyway, so the thing is, like I said, trying to extrapolate from all these bits of information, when the alarmists and the people are like, hey, whatever, man, we could always pull the plug until it finds a way to plug itself back in. Well, for me, that's when, if you're to be worried, that's the time to be worried because it's like, oh, it plugs itself back in, that kind of stuff. So yeah, but like I said, all these false concepts that we currently have, that you've got to have a credit score in order to be alive on the planet, it's going to be like, that doesn't make sense, or because and I think one of the reasons right now is I mentioned, I think previously in one of these where I heard about the great replacement theory, and I've heard people talk about the West is collapsing. It's like that's what empires do. But once again, self-preservation, when you know that hey, it's a system, an economic system that once we keep starting new economic systems, once the previous one fails, it's going to fail again because that's a life cycle of any empire. You have greedy people driven by I've got to get more. I've got to get more. I've got to be secure, as opposed to the 20%, the 80% that say, "Hey, let's all have. We can all have." But that's what capitalism is. And then once again, if it's combined with the psychopathy of somebody saying, "Hey, I will be replaced when you're the same species. You're not going anywhere." But if you're driven by those, then hey, you're gonna have people doing crazy stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendell. Um, does anybody who hasn't spoken yet have a thought or a comment or any ideas about this? Um, uh, Go ahead. Yeah, Jack, go ahead.
Um, yeah, so somewhat, well, I don't know if it's related, but it was in the Anderson Cooper interview with Hinton. Something that you mentioned about, let's see here, I'll quote, said the tidal wave of change we are going to be seeing and are already seeing is being run by people who are not elected. These are people, who are making billions of dollars about doing this. Nobody ever really elected them. There's been no consensus agreement that, let's see, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you get the point. So I recently, actually last night, I read because of this event. I was kind of curious for reading. It was on my book list, Precipice, which kind of talks about existential risk and some of the moral aspects, some philosophical. Does it mean to face these existential risks? Anyway, they're going through some of the history with like nuclear weapon and a bunch of other risks and dangers. And so with the nuclear weapon stuff, it was really interesting during the development of the atomic, the atom bomb. Um, I guess there was this discussion, and probably most of you know this. There was this discussion about the chance that they might ignite the atmosphere,
Yeah.
and there was this debate, going on between the various different. So anyway, in the book, like it actually mentions the idea that this this decision to go forward with the Trinity test was decided by scientists and military officers. There was never any political, there's never any political representative or, essentially the people and the representatives of the people were never involved in the decision making going forward with this type. So yeah, I mean, when you put that in parallel to what's happening now with artificial intelligence, likely that's also the case. That's going to be the case most likely moving forward. So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
So you're saying, Jack, that where AI is gonna AGI or is gonna keep going, and it's not really gonna be decided by politicians or governments or the will of the
Yes,
people.
our representatives and the people are likely not going to have a voice
Yeah.
in, whether, especially when risky decisions are being made.
What do you think? I mean, I think I can think of part of the reason why that would be the case is because, frankly, I don't think our politicians are very well informed or educated or know what we're talking about. That's part of the reason, and they are that way perhaps because the general public isn't. Why do you think that? Why?
No,
What?
that's absolutely right. I mean, but at the same time, and yes, you're right.
Because they don't
But
really.
but if you take a, if you take the Trinity test, the whole idea of igniting the atmosphere, at the very least, like even if you don't have the politicians making the final decision, which I think that they should. I think that they should, is right. Like for example, the decision to go, like there was a movie that recently came out. What was it called? The house is on. There's a bunch of fire or something, or like what is it, dynamite in the house or something. Like it just came out a couple of days ago on Netflix. It's the whole idea of a nuclear missile being launched to Chicago, and like what would the president do? There's been a bunch of these types of movies, in the past, whatever. You only have a few minutes, right? And so essentially, we've delegated this responsibility of how the United States will react to a nuclear attack, within a short period of time where Congress can't get together and vote on it. It's been delegated to the president. At least there's a representative of the people. I mean, it might not be ideal. And I know that, Victor, you've done presentations on different representative systems, whatever that might be more ideal. But at least there's something, right? It's not somebody who didn't go through some level of political process to be selected to make these types of decisions. Anyway, the point is that like ultimately I think like especially when it's something not imminent, right? It should at least be presented to representatives of the people to have some type of discussion. I mean, I'm not saying have open hearings and let everybody know, whatever, right? Especially if you're in an AI race with another country like China, whatever. But at the very least, representatives should be informed, and the topic should be explained to them. I mean, I think that should have been the case with the Trinity test and the chance of igniting the atmosphere. And probably that should be the case with any critical decision making that's like, there is a chance that something disastrous might happen, but we're going to go forward anyway because we're in a race to the bottom kind of thing, or like there's a prisoner's dilemma with China, and we've got to there's like this game theory thing going on, and the decisions made by scientists. Like that's kind of wild. I mean, maybe they might be the best informed, but again, I think our representatives should be involved in the discussion.
Yeah. So you think that AGI or super AI is actually, if it's possible to get to to get to that level of fearsome AI, if it's possible, it's going to happen basically because politicians are not going to get involved.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
So it's
Absolutely.
inevitable.
No,
If
that yeah. Oh,
if
well,
it's
okay.
possible, it's going to happen basically.
Well, one thing that could happen that is if some bad actor utilizes some version of artificial intelligence in the near future, and there's some disastrous calamity like on the level like a COVID-19 breakout or something like that. But it would probably even have to be worse than that, because I don't know if we've given up gain of function research. But when it comes to bio weapons, or like, I mean, again, there's like all kinds of shadow projects that could be happening that we're not aware of. But anyway, no, if some disaster, some global disaster happened that affected not just the United States, but China and a number of other countries, and we decide, whoa, we got to put the brakes on this. Then okay, no. But as things stand right now, other than some kind of wake up call to the globe, no, this is definitely going to go forward for sure. There's nothing stopping it. I mean, like a couple of years ago, was it like 2 years ago? They had the Bletchley Park thing, and the thing in Washington where all the execs came is like, regulate us. All the AI leading companies were saying to the government, regulate us, and like there's this huge concern, whatever. That's all gone by the wayside at this point.
Hmm.
Everything's all about acceleration right now, and beating China to AGI.
Hmm. Okay, thanks, Jack. I tend to, I think I agree with you that if it's possible, if people can do things, I think they will do them, even whether they're wise or not, or whether it's going to spell their end or not. I just don't, yeah, it would have, the only thing it could save us is that for some reason we don't understand, it's not going to happen because it's technically not possible. But I don't know. Does it?
Yes, and that I would agree with that. I was saying in the other group, um, 6 months ago, I would have absolutely believed this is going to happen 100%. Now I don't, because maybe there's a physical law that prevents it, like kind of what you were talking about. Maybe it's just impossible, not just with emotions, or whatever, but just like being able to create a super intelligence AGI that has like abilities that far surpasses humanity or something along those, because there's some physical law that prevents us from being able to do it, right? In physics,
Yeah,
that's always a possibility. Yeah.
yeah. Does anybody else have any any thoughts? Um, if not, actually, I do want to mention one other idea, although it's a little bit more out there than, but it's related to this. Before we go, and I don't know if people, and I do mention this in the write-up if you, in case you want to pursue it, and that's the idea of programmed death. There is a phenomenon in biology called apoptosis, and it's widely, known, and it's it basically says that some living things are living things that are living things independently by themselves, or that are part of a larger organism, a superorganism. Uh, Over time, have evolved specialized capabilities that they exist to serve the superorganism. For example, uh, individual cells in our bodies, like our skin cells, our muscle cells, the various parts of our body, that they're living things, the cells themselves, independently of us, but they can't reproduce. Their purpose, they will literally sacrifice themselves for the benefit of the larger superorganism, which is our whole bodies. Um, this has been found true throughout nature. It happens with, it's even happened with, uh, um, it's very obvious, if, for example, at the level of insects with ants colonies and beehives, the individual bee or ant, uh, most of them can't reproduce. There's a queen whose job it is to do the reproduction. The other individuals in the hive or the colony have a specialized purpose, and as long as they're able to do what they're designed, so to speak, or evolved to do, they're part and parcel of the productive parts of the larger superorganism. As soon as they become incapable, they actually, many of them engage in activity that can only be described as suicide. They literally begin to dissolve or destroy themselves or go off, separate, go off to die. And this is not something necessarily is like forced on them. It's like they're programmed to genetically to destroy themselves when they're no longer able to do to support the larger superorganism. And so you can see this at the cellular level. You could see it at the organism level. And there's some suggestion that it happens at the species level too. And that when a certain species evolves can begins to see itself or begins to as being part of some larger organism or entity whose survival matters more than its individual, whether it's an individual, a cell, or an entire species. The the this more specialized or subservient species may actually come to engage in behavior that can only be described as self-destructive uh, for the benefit of the larger system. It's like, uh, and the thought here is that this is the topic I've dealt with elsewhere, but there's a thought that the entire human species is getting to the point where we're beginning to see, to the extent we can identify with a larger ecosystem than ourselves, we might begin to engage to explain our behavior, whether it's conscious or not, as our self-destructive behavior is actually part of the natural evolution of nature. I mean it's a natural thing. At a certain point of our development, perhaps we weren't there in the past and never, but perhaps we're getting there. And perhaps our behavior, whether we're conscious or not, is like that of an individual cell who decides that it's time we dismiss ourselves for the better. The world would be a better place without us in it. In other words, and I keep mentioning that in some of my write-ups. But the awareness that that might be the case is it, and because there's so many ways, anthropogenic ways in which we could go, not just because nature decided to kill us off like they killed off the dinosaurs, but because of something we engage in and sort of halfway knowing that this is uh, potentially self-destructive. Um, we already mentioned nuclear weapons. Actually, the existential risk people who study all the different ways we could disappear think that among those ways that are anthropogenic, that are partly due to human behavior, the one that's most likely, at least the last time I checked, AI is not high up on the list yet. Maybe it will get there, but it isn't there. Right now, I think last time I checked, the most likely way these people who study how we're going to go through human means is through genetic engineering. The idea that the facility and the technology for developing, for example, a pathogen or virus that would spread a disease that combine things, features that don't appear in nature, but combine them in one microbe. For example, a disease that would have the uh, lethality of rabies. Which if you get rabies, you're going to die almost absolutely certainty, with great certainty. There isn't any real treatment for it once you get it. There's vaccines, but they don't help you if you're already infected. But imagine a virus that had that kind of assured destruction of who you are. But rabies is pretty hard to get. Suppose you were to combine that feature with the infectiousness of measles, which is very easy to get. You don't even have to be near someone who has it to be infected by it. So you make a microbe that's as infectious as measles, as deadly as rabies, and to make matters even worse, there are some diseases that have a long incubation period where you can get infected with them now, and you won't have any symptoms for a long time, for many months, even years later, and then they hit you. Uh, a disease like that is like Kuru disease. I think it's a disease that you can get and you have no symptoms for a long time. But the point is, if you are running around infecting everybody around you, pretty soon the whole human population would be infected with a deadly fatal disease about which we cannot do anything about, and it would be too late by the time the symptoms did show up to do anything about it, and that would be the end. That is the disease, nightmare disease, that it doesn't exist in nature, but could it be genetically engineered? Uh, the possibilities there, and that actually something like that is what the experts in existential risk think is the most likely way that we go if we go anthropogenetically because of something we did. Um, and AI isn't yet up there with that level of certainty, but or maybe it's trying to make its way up there, but it's not there yet. Anyway, a nice cheerful thought for the end. Go ahead, Jack. And then
Yeah, it's interesting because okay, so like I said, I was reading this book Precipice, right? That talks to like all the different existential risks, and the author agrees with you that the anthropogenic existential risks are much higher. You know, the existential catastrophe via chance within the next 100 years is much higher with the anthropogenic risks. Um, the book was published in March of 2000, so it was around this time that COVID started to kind of get a foothold, right? Um,
yeah,
and and so at the time, he actually lists out his kind of like estimations or chances in the next 100 years for the various different ones. Asteroids, super volcanoes, stellar explosions, other natural risks, nuclear war, climate change, and so he has unaligned artificial intelligence as the highest with a 1 in 10 chance over the next 100 years. Engineered pandemics is second with 1 in 30. I wonder, his opinion likely maybe had shift. I don't know. I mean, if this was done a year after the published date, I wonder if his opinion would have shifted and would have been in line with what you're talking about in terms of the engineered pandemics. But even if that is the case, I think he still puts the unaligned artificial intelligence in second.
hmm. Okay, yeah, okay. It's been 2 hours. So does anybody have any comments? Final comments? If not, uh, um, yeah, yeah. I want to thank everybody for coming. Um, the just for the benefit, yeah, we're having the next meetup will actually be on a more humane topic on. Uh, it's going to be a film discussion about a film next month on birth. If you are interested in that, check out the link. You can watch it online. Thanks everybody, and there will be I'll be posting the next philosophical discussion topic pretty soon, and I'm not actually sure what it's going to be, but I'll be posting that pretty soon. Again, thanks everyone for coming. Okay.
I wanted to thank you for hosting and appreciate the music video. It's really
Okay.
cool. I've not seen that one before.
Which one? The Kraftwerk one or the
Yeah,
other?
the Kraftwerk one. Kraftwerk one. That was awesome.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Bye everybody.
Thank you.